Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Quran for Ramadan. We have been studying a passage from Surah Bani Israel, the 17th Surah of the Quran, which actually constitutes the 10 commandments of the Quran. Today we will be finishing off that passage. We'll start off where we left off. So this is verse 32 that we ended. And now today we'll start off with verse 33. The words are وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ إِنَّهُ كَانَ مَنْصُورًا وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَأَوْفُوا بِالْعَهْدِ إِنَّ الْعَهْدَ كَانَ مَسْئُولًا وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ إِذَا كِلْتُمْ وَزِنُوا بِالْقِسْطَاسِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَحْسَنُ تَأْوِيلًا وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا إِنَّكَ لَنْ تَخْرِقَ الْأَرْضَ وَلَنْ تَبْلُغَ الْجِبَالَ طُولًا كُلُّ ذَلِكَ كَانَ سَيِّئُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ مَكْرُوهًا. Do not wrongfully kill any person whose life has been held sacred by God, and remember that he who is slain unjustly, we have given his heir the authority. Then he should not exceed limits in killing, because he has been helped. Do not even go near the wealth of an orphan except in a goodly way, until he reaches maturity. And keep your promises, because you shall be held accountable for promises. Give full measure when you measure, and weigh with correct scales. This is better and fairer as far as the consequences are concerned. Do not go after what you know not, because eyes, ears, and heart, all of them shall be questioned. And do not walk arrogantly on the earth, because neither can you split apart the earth, nor can you reach the height of the mountains. The evil of each of these things to your Lord is very displeasing. So, continuing with the directives that have been mentioned earlier on, the first thing is that is now taken up is that one cannot wrongfully kill any person. So, the life of a person occupies a very high priority. It is sacred. No one has the authority to take the life of any person, except, of course, if he has killed the person. The heirs have the right to seek revenge from that person, but that too, the state has to intervene in this matter. And as far as the state is concerned, in this regard, no person can take the law in his or her own hands. All such matters have to be reported to the police and to the concerned authorities, and that is how the matters will proceed. No one can take that revenge in a personal way. Also, if there has to be any forgiveness on the part of the heirs, then the state must also agree to it, as has been mentioned elsewhere in the Quran. So, life occupies a very high priority. It is sacred. It is something which is inviolable. It cannot in any way be tampered with. We have to also take into account the circumstances of those times of tribal Arabia when the Prophet had been sent to the Arabs. We know that tribes, they were continuously at war, perpetually at war with one another, and this would happen that wars would continue on trivial issues, and people would seek revenge from one another, and in their revenge and in their frenzy for that revenge, they would go far beyond the wrong that they had suffered. So the Quran has said that in this regard, you have to be absolutely sure that in this regard, nothing can violate any authority in this regard. You cannot take the law in your own hands. And as far as human beings are concerned, their own life is inviolable. It cannot be tampered with. In fact, if I go a step further, if you look at some of the directives which have been given in our religion regarding animal sacrifice, that too is something which the Almighty has said that no person is allowed or eligible to take the life of an animal unless he invokes the name of God, which means that life itself is sacred. Human life cannot be taken at all unless some punishment has to be given to that person. And even animal life is something which cannot be taken unless God's approval is sought. And that approval is that when you say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. In other words, taking an animal's life at the time that we are killing that animal for our own benefit and comfort and our consumption, even then the whole theory behind it is that human life is so sacred that even nothing can violate that sanctity, except if the person is guilty of murder. Also, the other thing which has been said in the Quran is that there are just two instances on the basis of which, or in lieu of which, life can be taken. One, of course, is life for life, and the other is if the person is guilty of spreading anarchy in the land, which in the terms of the Quran is called fasad fil ard. So, anarchy in the land and murder, these are the only two offenses which can be punished by a capital punishment. No other crime is punishable by death. This is something that has to be noted. So the next thing which is mentioned in these verses is وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ أَشُدَّهُ. So do not even go near the wealth of an orphan except in a goodly way. This again is something which is mentioned in the Quran in the beginning of Surah Nisa. It is said that the wealth of the orphans that has been entrusted to their guardians or to their to people who are looking after them, this must not be tampered with. Of course, if the person or the guardian is poor, he can benefit from the wealth of the orphan, and that too as much as his need is. Otherwise, guardians who are rich, who are well off, they are not allowed to tamper with the wealth of the orphans. And it is said that they should keep judging the orphans regarding their mental ability. وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَ حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحَ are the words of Surah Nisa, which means that until they reach marriageable age, you keep judging them. You keep checking them whether they are able to spend correctly if you return the wealth to them or not. And also, it is said that the guardians must not in any way consume the wealth hastily, thinking that these orphans might come to age early. But as far as consuming the wealth of orphans unlawfully is concerned, the Quran has said that this is something of a heinous crime. It is a horrific sin, and it will be punished by the Almighty, because orphans, we all know, they are the weakest section of the society. Not only that, not only in the Arab society, of course, even today, people who are left fatherless, who are admitted to orphanages, or who are taken care of other individuals as a result, we find that they are the ones that need our sympathy the most. As people of the society, as individuals of the society, as members of an esteemed society, it is the responsibility of the near ones who have orphans in their family to look after them. And we know the Almighty through the Prophet, of course, and the Prophet has given these glad tidings that a person who looks after an orphan will have a lot of reward in the hereafter. So orphans, widows, weak persons, elderly persons, persons who are not able to work for themselves, all these are very, very honorable sections of the society. And as the Quran has repeatedly said, that you have to look after them, you have to look after their needs. And one of the most important things that we have to realize is that it at times is not just the financial need of an orphan or a weak person of the society that has to be catered for. Of course, they have to be catered for. More than that, you have to respect their self-esteem. You must not damage their self-esteem, because at times you say words which might hurt them. You might be looking after a person who is an orphan, you might be looking after a girl or a boy, but then your demeanor must be also very befitting. No words which hurt them in any way must be uttered. They must be generously looked after. They must be looked after in a very affectionate way, in a very, very kind and sympathetic way, and in no way should their self-respect be compromised. The next thing which is stated is وَأَوْفُوا بِالْأَهْدِ إِنَّ الْأَهْدَ كَانَ مَسْئُولًا. And keep your promises, because you shall be held accountable for promises. So this again is something that we need to understand, that to give our word is something that we have to honor. Whenever we give our word, we just cannot go back on our word. Yes, there could be some contingent circumstances, maybe some emergent circumstances in which we are not able to honor our promise, but in that case, we have to make full amends. We must offer an apology. And it should not be a habit that we keep making commitments that we cannot honor. Today, we often think and see that we make commitments, we do give promises about which we know from the very start that we might not be able to honor them. So the best thing that we learn in this regard is to say no. A commitment that we cannot honor is a commitment that we should not give. A promise that we cannot honor is a promise that we should not take in any way or make in any way, because this is something that is absolutely unbecoming. It declares a person, it makes a person to be an irresponsible person of the society. Such a person will never be trusted, he will never be dependable, and hence he will be left far behind in the race of life because no one will trust him. So, also to understand this fact is that there are promises which are unwritten as well. So, it's not always a promise that you give from your mouth or your tongue which has to be honored. There are so many unwritten promises. For example, our commitment to our parents. There's nothing written about this in any way. But then to respect them, to honor them, that again is something that is part of that promise. The Sharia that we are required to follow, the religion that we are required to follow, the Quran calls it to be the covenant of God, Misaqullah, which is the covenant which God has taken, and therefore it itself is a promise. It itself has to be honored, and that honor can only come if we are always we are vigilant and diligent in always looking at the requirements and the requisites of these promises. So another unwritten promise that we can think of is is a person who's living in a country, and he is or she has to be a law-abiding citizen, because abiding by the laws of a country is also part of the promise of the citizenship. We might never have signed that citizenship because we are born in a country, but then this is an unwritten promise to the society that we are living in, that we will look after its needs, we will honor its needs, we will follow its laws, we will never compromise its security in any way. So promises, whether they are understood, promises, whether they are written or declared, they have to be honored. And on this very aspect stands the whole edifice of religion. It is then said, "Awful kayla iza kiltum wazinu bil qistasil mustaqim zalika khayrun wa ahsanu ta'wila." Give full measure when you measure and weigh with correct scales. This is better and fairer as far as the consequences are concerned. So once again, we see that how very accurate in this regard we need to be when we are weighing something to sell, and when we are measuring something again to sell, which actually gives us this ethics regarding selling and purchasing goods. When we are going in the market, the person who is selling goods has to stick to this business ethic, that he or she must never weigh in a way that is a means of deception to the buyer. He or she must weigh with full scales, with full measure. And this is something which is not just a matter of goodness, it is a matter of obligation. If you are weighing with full scales, this is a matter of obligation. If you're earning something because you have tampered with the scales, then remember, this is illegal money. This is money which is not halal in the eyes of the Almighty. And any money which is not halal in the Almighty is something which can bring a lot of trials and tribulations for us. At another place, the Quran has also said that besides this, the problem that might arise because of this unlawful money, the Almighty also does not accept charity from unlawful money. If you have to give in charity, the money has to be pure. Hence, the advice regarding earning money, which is absolutely clean, which is absolutely pure, it goes without saying. And here we know that this is what does happen in markets, in so many places where things are being bought and sold, that people, they can easily make that small difference, in which maybe a very tiny amount of difference can cause a huge amount in the price. But they need to understand that this is what, I mean, God is watching them. If they make such a deception, they cause such a deception, they deceive people because of weighing less or measuring less, then they are really filling their bellies with fire. They are playing with fire, and they will not realize that how this will adversely affect them, maybe through various trials to their own selves, maybe in the form of sickness, or maybe other tribulations that even might come to their own family. So we have to be absolutely clean in this matter. وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. So the words are, do not go after what you know not, because eyes, ears, and heart, all of them shall be questioned. So once again, the directive is that you don't go after things, you don't spy after things. Especially this is the case when we are trying to find the faults of other people and we are trying to pry on other people and spy on them. The Quran says that don't go after things that you do not know, because this is an unbecoming attitude and we have to leave it, because when we do so, our eyes and ears and heart, they all get contaminated. And when they get contaminated, of course, the inner purification, which is the objective of religion, that is sacrificed and must not be done so. It is said, وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا إِنَّكَ لَن تَخْرِقَ الْأَرْضَ وَلَن تَبْلُغَ الْجِبَالَ طُولًا. And do not walk arrogantly on the earth, because neither can you split apart the earth, nor can you reach the height of the mountains. كُلُّ ذَلِكَ كَانَ سَيِّئُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ مَكْرُوهًا. The evil of each of these things to your Lord is very displeasing. The final thing which is said before the verses or this passage finishes is that one must not be arrogant. Arrogance is something which leads us to heinous sins. It leads us to as grave a sin as polytheism. It leads us to people to not admit their mistakes. It leads them to make themselves and feel themselves to be superior to other people. And this is something which the Almighty dislikes. As human beings, we have to be humble. We have to be down to earth. We have to always feel that we have our own follies and flaws, and therefore it is not at all becoming, it is absolutely unbecoming that we feel ourselves to be superior to other people. So with this we come to an end to a discussion on these verses, and now we can go on to the question answer session.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for a beautiful explanation. Our first question will come from Amir Masood. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Dr. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I just the question is a little bit divergent from the topic which we have discussed just now. It relates to the authority of the state, and which we have been stressing repeatedly, that no individual has the right to take law in his hand, and it is the state which decides whether somebody is right or wrong, whether something is halal or haram, or whether anybody has to go for a war or jihad or something like that. So the state has that authority. So now, I mean, what we see is that in our banking system or in our day-to-day living, I asked you about the taxes last time, and you gave a very prudent reply. Just wanted to ask that if you have a money in the bank, and these banks systems have been authorized by the state to give interest, and also to cut taxes onto that money. So is that going to be halal or haram if you are having that sort of practice being done with your money in the bank?
So you see, as far as deducting zakat is concerned from your bank account, this is perfectly fine. It is okay, because this is the prerogative of the state to collect zakat, which is a tax. However, if you have a savings account or something similar in which interest accrues in your account, then you should not use that interest money. I mean, in the first place, it should be, you should think whether it's essential for you to keep a savings account. And in all intents and purposes, a current account is a better alternative. But if you don't have an alternative, and if you have to have a savings account, then the interest which is accrued in that account must not be used by the person, and it should just be given away in charity.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's a question in the chat. Did Prophet Muhammad go through something that we would call nowadays an existential crisis? Question our existence. How can we learn from his life how to deal with one?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, and and what we find from the Quran, I don't think that he ever went through such an existential crisis. All that he did go through was that he sought after the truth. He wanted to know the truth, and he, as a person who before he was called to the ministry of prophethood, which is of course in the first 40 years of his life, he was a very rightful individual. He followed the practices of Abraham. He even did Hajj in his own time before he was called as a prophet, and he did it in the right way and did not indulge in any innovations that the Quraysh used to. So as a seeker of the truth, he was a person who would always want some more details, and it does look that he had that thirst in him. And of course, as a person, he had that mettle, and he had that wherewithal and that exceptional personality, because of which the Almighty chose him as the last prophet. But as far as any existential crisis is concerned, I think this is more more something which relates to today's minds. As far as the Prophet was concerned, he, in his own times, was after the truth as a truth seeker, and he got it.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's another question. You talked about arrogance. So, what could be the tiniest act of arrogance that a person could do?
Well, to make fun of other people to start off. You see, at times you don't realize that the person with whom you are talking to or laughing or maybe cracking jokes, he or she is not in a position to reply back to you because he might or she might be slightly lesser in status, or there could be other things that somehow a person is not able to reply back. So I think we have to be absolutely careful in our conversation that we don't hurt anyone. You see, when you're cracking jokes and when you're making fun, maybe in good faith, at times you don't realize that you hit the self-respect of a person. Similarly, when we are walking, when we are dressing, so all these things can become a sign of arrogance if there is any element of show off, and any element that we think that this wearing this thing or maybe talking like that would make ourselves superior to other people, and people might feel that we are greater to them.
Thank you. Rafia Khaja, you may ask your question now.
Dr. Shehzad, as you correctly said, we have absolutely no right to take anybody's life or punish them for anything. But you also see in our part of the world, day and night, we have honor killing, we are killing for blasphemy. Now, who is responsible for stopping this? Isn't this the responsibility of our state or our religion? Where is all this coming in, and how can we help to stop it?
I think the basic source of this is lack of education or proper education on religion. Such honor killings, again, and because of the fact that there are laws which protect these honor killings, because at times what happens is that a father kills a daughter and the son and the mother forgive him, because they think that anyone can forgive the perpetrator of murder, without realizing that the true law in this regard is that the heirs cannot forgive someone unless the state also is convinced that he or she is worthy of being forgiven. So firstly, we have to understand that the law of qisas is not that you can just go up after these honor killings and then go scot-free. Secondly, also we need to get educated about the issue of blasphemy. We should know that there is no direct punishment of blasphemy mentioned in the Quran. What to speak of taking the life of any person? So basically, this lack of education or wrong, I would say, indoctrination of certain religious ideas that has to be set right. And the role that we can play, of course, is that in our own circle of authority, in our own circle of influence, the more we educate ourselves and make other people aware of this education, the better it is.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Baran, you may ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, my question is about the session we had in the couple hours earlier about building a God connection. What if you wanted something really bad from God and God gave it to you, but then he took it away from you as well again? So like, and you are begging to God to give it back to you, but God, you still did not get it back from God. Does this mean that like you have to learn something, you have to improve yourself, or like you have to still wait on God's blessing, or what does this mean?
Well, I think actually it's difficult to give an opinion because it depends on what has happened, what is the background, what exactly was given and what exactly was confiscated, what were the circumstances. But just to be more general, what we can say is that, well, there is some wisdom in whatever happens. And that wisdom at times we are not able to gauge right at the time that it is happening. And at times we need to wait. And later on we come to realize that if something has happened against our expectations, it was actually in our favor. So it might take time for us to realize, but generally this is how things happen.
But what if the dua you made got answered by God, but then God answered the dua, but also took away the dua again? Is this like a sign it's not good for you, or like you should just move on with something else?
As I said, I mean, it's difficult to comment unless more details are known, because you see, this could be, I mean, it could be a person's fault as well. Maybe he has not fully cared about their thing. Maybe some lack of strategy or some wrong attitude was the reason. So you see, it's not always God who is should come into play. We should also analyze our own actions. So unless we have more details, it's difficult to comment.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
Dr.
much.
Shehzad. There's a question. The Quran says, "Whatever misfortune befalls you is a consequence of your own deeds,
Mm,
but
mm,
much of it He forgives."
mm.
Any good that happens to you come from God, while anything bad that happens to you is through yourself. So how do we ascertain what we did wrong if we have not realized our mistake, and how do we know that if it's from God or if we did something wrong?
So if you pick up this verse and look at the context, you'll see that this is not a general verse. It is not being addressed to all mankind. It is not being said that everyone who does, who faces this evil is because of his own bad deeds. This is specifically addressed to the Quraysh. If you pick up this verse and you realize that these are the people to whom the Prophet had come, and he had ventured forth with all kindness and with all affection to call them to one God. He cleared up all their misconceptions, but they insisted in denying, and they insisted in their arrogance to stick to their gods. So it is by addressing such people that it is said that if some calamity befalls you, it is because of your own misdeeds. So when you find such verses in the Quran, please do look up the context, see what is being discussed, and then you'll get to know that these are not general verses. They are mostly said to the addressees of a messenger.
Thank you. Another question is that if someone repents, does Allah forgives the three major sins mentioned in the surah and only minor sins? I'm sorry, this is a question from a previous earlier session, so I don't know what surah it's talking about.
So again, this is in Surah Furqan, where the three major sins are mentioned, which are polytheism, murder, and adultery. So you see, as far as polytheism is concerned, if it is not deliberate and a person is fully penitent about it, yes, there is a chance that he would be forgiven. Only insistent and deliberate polytheism is something which will not be forgiven. As far as murder is concerned, that is of course something which can be forgiven by the Almighty once the person who was murdered is also he's also asked and he or she is willing to forgive that person. Adultery, of course, is a crime which is of mutual consent. So in such cases, if both of these both the perpetrators repent, there is a chance that the Almighty might forgive them as well. So it's not that they are totally unforgivable. They have their conditions, but they are forgivable.
Thank you. Baran, you may ask your question now.
Yes, I want to ask a follow-up question because if could it also be that because we commit certain sins, like maybe a major or minor sin, that God will take His blessing away from us?
It is possible. I mean, it is. We cannot ascertain that. We cannot be certain that this happened because of this. But yes, it is a possibility.
So would that be considered a punishment or a test at that point?
As I said, I mean, we can never be sure of that, because for that we need to have God's communication. We are not in no position to communicate with God. So therefore, either of these two could be the case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's a question in the chat which summarizes too that life is very easy if it's lived correctly and within the norms. It seems that it cannot be that easy. So what is Islam's take on it? And am I correct in my understanding that Islam's guidance explains life as simple if lived correctly?
You see, what we can become aware of while we study the Quran is that life should be lived in a way that you contribute all that you can in this world. But whenever there is a choice to be made between this life and the next, then the choice must be in favor of the next life. So to live in this life, while having the preference of the afterlife in front of you, is the single point agenda which the Quran gives you. You must contribute in life. You must live a professional life, whatever traits that you have, whatever benefits that you have, whatever aptitude that you have. Make the best out of them, best out of your circumstances. But whenever there is a clash between the preferences and priorities of this world and the next world, then you have to give preference to the priorities of the next world.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's another question. There are reported stories when whole societies were destroyed while the sin was only of a few, while masses remained quiet. Today, Gaza is suffering not only in power of masses, we will suffer because of our leaders did not act but we voted, but our votes changed our. He just wants to know that will we suffer because of our leaders or because of the people who could have done something but they didn't do it?
Well, again, you see, it is all situational. Different scenarios have different situations. At times, the leaders are at fault. At times, the decisions that they take are at fault. At times, the people who remain silent and could have made a difference, they are at fault. So there's an assortment of reasons that can be analyzed. So for each, we have to make a different analysis.
All right. So, if there is some sort of consequences, will it be in this world or will it be like after?
You see, the consequences that a person suffers as a result of wrong decisions, again, I mean, it depends on the status of that person. If he's a general in the army, if he's a leader, the bigger his position, the bigger the fault if he makes will affect a larger community than vice versa. Similarly, if he has done something intentionally wrong, not only will he be, punished, of course, or the decision will go wrong against him, and he might be punished in the courts of this world, but in the hereafter as well, if that decision was deliberately done to satisfy his own ego, maybe, or his own personal interest. So it all depends on what the situation is.
Thank you, Rafia. You may ask your question now.
Dr. Shehzad, as you know, in the Arab world, it is very common for a man to have more than one wife. And in fact, the first wife would be quite welcome, the second, and then the third and the fourth. Is this something cultural in the Arab world, or are they just following the directions of when Islam came in and the directions of the Quran?
Yes, it is more of a cultural practice, but let me tell you, this culture is now changing in Arabs as well. And just as in the subcontinent culture, wives don't like second wives or third wives to come to their husbands. Now, in the last 10 years, we witnessed the same change happening in the Arab world as well.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for an enlightening session. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining. See you all tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.
Allah.